Well, Kentucky basketball's got another tough road game on their hands, and the question that everybody is asking is which Wildcats will we see this time?
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, and new customers, if you join today, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. You can visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be previewing Kentucky basketball's matchup with the Mississippi State Bulldogs' 5-game winning streak for MSU. Going to talk about what they are good at, what they struggle with, some matchups, and I'll give my final score prediction at the very end of the show. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you are listening on podcast, please subscribe to the show wherever you are tuned in, Apple, Spotify, Google, etc. If you are listening or watching rather on YouTube, would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky versus Mississippi State. As you all know, Kentucky basketball coming off of a 22-point win at home against the Alabama Crimson Tide. Big-time resume-boosting victory, and the Wildcats have another opportunity here. Tough road game that Ken Pom believes the Wildcats will lose against Mississippi State. Let's start here with what the Bulldogs do well. Obviously, like I mentioned, Chris Jans' squad is on a 5-game winning streak. They were at one point 14-8, 3-6 in conference play, but now 19-8, 8-6 in conference play, projected to finish the season 21-10 and 10-8 in the league. Really interesting story for Mississippi State so far this season. Started the season out pretty strong, 11-2. Like I mentioned, kind of hit that rough patch in the middle of the year in conference play, lost some games to some tough teams, Kentucky included, and now they've kind of churned some things around and they've started to play some better basketball. The defense has been what has carried Mississippi State, not just this season, but throughout Chris Jans' time over in Starkville. According to Ken Pom, Mississippi State ranks 11th in the nation in adjusted defensive efficiency. They rank 4th in the SEC in points allowed per game. The calling card for MSU's defense is their 3-point defense, which should make for an interesting matchup here in this game. They are 4th in the country in field goal percentage from outside the arc, 28.3%. That's the shooting percentage that they hold their opponents to. Now, we're going to get into some individual matchup thoughts about how this lengthy, fast-paced Wildcats team actually matches up with the Bulldogs, because we've already seen this game play out once before, and I'm just curious to see if the Wildcats are able to kind of replicate that 90-77 performance that they've already had this season. So the defense here for the Bulldogs has been what's carried them. Their effective field goal percentage is top 25 nationally. They do a lot of really good things on that side of the basketball. I think the interesting thing to note here is that they don't have a long average possession length. In fact, it's one of the fastest in the nation on the defensive side of the ball. But they don't turn over teams a ton. They do a really good job of it in conference play, but on the whole, they've not been phenomenal at it. I mean, they do a good job in conference play, but relative to some other teams, I mean, they're not in that elite category. It's just a good, solid defense that is led by big man Tolu Smith. So I said that this has been an interesting story for MSU so far this season. A lot of it has had to do with the absence at the beginning of the year of their big man Tolu Smith, who is entering his 5th season playing college basketball. Actually, believe it or not, guys, Tolu Smith started his career at Western Kentucky. I did not know that before researching this episode. researching stuff for this episode. He played 1 year at WKU, then he transferred to Mississippi State. This is his 4th season now. He did not play a game until this year, until December 31st against not Boston College, Bethune-Cookman. His first game back had 16 points, and he has been on a tear this season, averaging almost 17 points per game, shooting almost 60% from the floor, 8.1 rebounds per game, returned from injury again at the end of 2023, did not play, I believe it was like 9 or 10 games for the Bulldogs. And then when he returned, Mississippi State really started to pick up on offense just a little bit. But Smith, 6'11", 245 pounds, he is an enforcer on the offensive end of the floor, does a great job not just scoring, but also rebounding, which is the third thing I want to get to here that Mississippi State does really well. So they play really good defense. They've got a great big man down low, and then they rebound the basketball as a team pretty darn well. They're 23rd in the nation in offensive rebound percentage. They're top 3 in the SEC in offensive rebound percentage on both sides of the ball. So they do a great job of getting themselves second chance opportunities, and they also do a really good job preventing other teams from getting those same opportunities. And Tolu Smith has a lot to do with that. You look down the list here. Cameron Matthews, somebody who's been here for a while for Mississippi State, also has 7 boards per game. Jimmy Bell Jr., 6.1 rebounds per game. DJ Jeffries, 5.4 rebounds per game. It's interesting the blend of veteran experience that the Bulldogs have here, but most of these guys actually are from other programs. They transferred in from other programs. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, DJ Jeffries transferred in from Memphis, has been here for quite some time, entering his 5th year of college basketball. Like I mentioned, Tolu Smith transferred in from Western Kentucky to begin with. I mean, they've just got different guys up and down this roster. Oregon State transferred to Sean Davis, has been here for a couple of years now. We'll get to him later on in the matchup segment of this prediction preview here. But the Bulldogs, tall, physical, kind of like to grind games out. They don't have an extremely slow pace on offense, but they do like to play with a more methodical approach. So that's kind of what we have here. If we're just highlighting things before we dive into the individual matchups, just what does Mississippi State do well? Well, they've been on a 5-game winning streak. They've rebounded well. They have a really good defense and a great big man that we will discuss further later on in the show. So we'll continue to dive into this matchup. Let's talk about some of the things that maybe Mississippi State struggles with, and a lot of it has to do with what they're doing on the offensive side of the basketball. Before we dive into that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. You can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's 150 buckaroos if your team wins, if your bet wins, I should say. You can bet on I'm assuming you're going to be betting on whichever team you prefer, obviously here. Baseball season coming up. Some of you guys really excited about the Braves, about the Reds. We here stand Atlanta. So maybe you want to go lay down some stuff on baseball. Maybe you want to go lay down some stuff on the NBA with some former Kentucky Wildcats just balling out in the league right now. You can do quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. So you need to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Shoot your shot. Again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Shoot your shot with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you, previewing Kentucky versus Mississippi State. Big-time Quad 1 opportunity for the Kentucky Wildcats. If you have not subscribed to the show, please go ahead and do so, whether you're listening on podcast or you're checking us out over on the YouTube channel. I greatly appreciate everybody over on the YouTube channel and on the podcast feed who have subbed, joined up, and have been giving me their thoughts over on the socials and in the comments below. At Locked On UK on Twitter is where you can find me. Also at LanceDaw_ as well. I mentioned there, and this is something I want to kind of stick on here before we dive into what State does poorly. I mentioned there the resume building opportunity that Kentucky has. Actually, if you go and look at the net ratings right now, ratings, depends on who you talk to, what they are. It's the KenPom ratings, and I believe the net rankings. Mississippi State, now inside the top 30. They are number 28 in the country in the net rankings. According to this list here, Kentucky now up to 19th, by the way, now that they have another quad one victory in their resume here. And it's because they beat Mississippi State earlier this year at home. And in order to get a quad one victory, that team that you play at home has to be inside the top 30 of the net rankings. Well, now Mississippi State is. So UK 5-5 in quad one games can move to 6-5 in quad one victories if they beat State on the road tomorrow. Oh, by the way, happy Justin Edwards Day to all those out there that are celebrating. So we talked about the resume there. Let's go ahead and dive into what does State struggle with? What do they not do well? Well, on the whole, Mississippi State has struggled with offense so far this season. Now, it hasn't necessarily been terrible. The Bulldogs still average 75 points per contest, and their shooting numbers are not abysmal, but they are certainly not good. If you look specifically at conference-specific statistics, Mississippi State is 7th in effective field goal percentage. They are 10th in three-point percentage, 5th in two-point percentage. Again, just average to bad numbers there. And if you want to look at some other numbers, you'll start to see, okay, the Bulldogs are not particularly efficient. In fact, if you want to look at their efficiency, they're 9th in the SEC. They are last in this conference in turnover percentage, free throw percentage, and non-steal turnover percentage. So that means this team, they spread the ball around quite a bit, but they are not consistent with their passing. They will make mistakes. They will turn themselves over. They are, again, last in the conference in turnover percentage. We just saw Kentucky take one of the most turnover-prone teams in the SEC, Alabama, take them out to the woodshed and score 29 points off of turnovers in the process. Could we see something not like that here, but something, I guess, reflective of these statistics for the Bulldogs? Again, last in the SEC in free throw percentage. If you're going to win a tough quad one game on the road, you're going to need the home team to miss some free throws. And we saw that against Florida in the SEC opener. We saw the Gators struggle at the foul line, and it led to some really clutch opportunities that Kentucky ended up taking advantage of as that game wound down. So State struggles in areas that I think Kentucky can take advantage of. Again, it's just the rebounding. It's the guys like Tolu Smith, which again, we'll get into this whenever we talk about the matchups. It's the guys like Smith who really do concern me. So while the offense has not been really that, it's not been great. It's not been good. There are still players on this roster that individually, just from a matchup perspective, I think give me concern. And it's going to tie all the way back into the theme that we've seen from Kentucky this entire season, their inability to play consistently, especially on the road. We just saw them completely fall apart at LSU after winning at Auburn. Just, again, not consistent on the road. You win a really, really tough game, and you don't get up for a lesser game. You win a game at home against Alabama in a really big-time matchup. Kentucky has got to come into this one focused and understanding that this is a big game they have to get up for. How does Kentucky respond to the physicality that State is going to produce, even when they are not efficient on offense? That's going to be a huge question today. I also have another interesting stat for you guys here. So we're talking about State and essentially how their offense, they can't shoot the three. They're not particularly efficient inside the arc, despite having a lot of different guys that are crafty and can get to the rim in multiple ways. Here's a stat for you about their offense, and this is something else that concerns me. Mississippi State has played 14 conference games. Like I mentioned earlier, 8-6 in conference play, 14 total conference games. If you rank those games by best effective field goal percentage to worst effective field goal percentage, here's where every single game that Mississippi State has played since January 30th ranks in those 14 games. Again, from most effective field goal percentage to least effective field goal percentage. Games since January 30th ranked number 1, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 8, number 9, and number 14. So over half of the games they've played since January 30th, so essentially over the last month, over half of the games that they have played have been some of the most effective games they've played on offense in conference play period. Now you'll notice there were also games that ranked number 8, number 9, and number 14. Their game February 3rd against Alabama ranks number 14. That's the major outlier here. You've seen the best of state and you've seen the worst of state. More often than not, they're playing good basketball over the last month, but the one game they completely fell apart in was against a tall, lengthy, fast-paced three-point shooting team. Does Kentucky, who has already beaten this team 90-77, do they show out like Alabama did? Again, I think it goes back to how focused is Kentucky in this game. Are they going to get up for it? Are they going to play like they need the win, like they're playing the Crimson Tide? Just some other interesting notes here about these 14 games. Again, ranking them from most to least effective field goal percentage. Their game against Kentucky, Mississippi State's game against Kentucky, ranked at number 7 out of their 14 conference games in effective field goal percentage. So it's just their average is what they did against UK on the road. And then their game against Auburn and their game against Florida outside of January 30th, like before that, ranked number 12 and number 13. So they have struggled against lengthier, more fast-paced, aggressive offenses. I think Kentucky, on paper, despite what Kim Pom says, should win this game. I think that they should. I think it's just simply a matter of whether or not they get up and they slow this offense down while also knocking down some shots in transition and really making sure that they don't let State bog them down from beyond the arc. Because in this last game, Mississippi State not only took more threes than Kentucky, they made more threes, had a better percentage overall. But the issue was that they could not stop Kentucky inside the arc. Rob Dillingham, Aaron Bradshaw, DJ Wagner, Trey Mitchell, Antonio Reeves. Kentucky ended up shooting 74% inside the arc. 74%. I don't think they're not going to be able to pull that off again. Round 2, in the hump, it's not happening. Now you're looking at a game that I think is going to be a little bit lower scoring. I think it's going to be similar from a pace perspective. And I think Kentucky's going to try some more three-pointers. I think they're just going to have to be able to hit. So let's dive into some matchups here. Let's start with the big one. Tolu Smith against Ugonna Onyenso, Aaron Bradshaw, Zvonimir Ivisic. Ivisic, on offense, played great against Alabama. Bradshaw played well for the minutes that he was in. Onyenso didn't play fantastic, but this is a little bit of a different style of a team that we're looking at here. Smith, a more traditional big man, post you up, back you down to the basket, and lay it in type of guy. I think Onyenso will get the chance to step up and play well in this one. And if he doesn't, I have concerns about the physicality of Aaron Bradshaw and Zvonimir Ivisic. If Ivisic gets his minutes in this one, he's going to have to make the most of it, not just on offense. 7'2", you got to step up on D, man. You got to do it. Another interesting matchup here. Josh Hubbard, second on the team in scoring. 15.5 points per game in just 25 minutes of action. He is not an efficient shooter, but he jacks shots up whenever he is in the game. He's used on a lot of possessions. And again, not the most efficient, 5'10" freshman. But we've known Kentucky to struggle on defense at the guard position at times. Hubbard will have his shots. He will have his opportunities. It's just a matter of whether or not Wagner, specifically, Dillingham, and Sheppard can hold him at bay. Another guard that I'm looking at that could be a concern in this one is Deshaun Davis. Davis leads the team in assists. He also averages 6 points per game in 23 minutes per contest. And he is more crafty getting to the rim. Now, he is actually less effective from the floor than Josh Hubbard is. Hubbard shoots 38%. Davis shoots 35% from the floor, not from three, from the floor. Neither of them are effective. But they get shots up. They get a lot of shots up when they're in there, and Davis distributes the basketball pretty well, making sure that Davis and Smith don't eat Kentucky alive on the pick and roll is going to be important here. And I think that also you're looking not necessarily at the big-time scorers in this one, but you're looking at guys like Jimmy Bell Jr. coming off of the bench and not tearing up Kentucky at the power forward spot as well. Jimmy Bell, 6'10", 280-pound senior, typically plays at the 4 or the 5, primarily the 5, whenever Smith's not in. But it's Bell, it's Smith, it's Keyshawn Murphy, 6'10", 235-pound sophomore, Cam Matthews, 6'7", 230-pound senior. They've got some weight, they've got some height. Kentucky, just across the board, has got to be able to withstand State's desire to drive to the rim and punch you in the mouth and finish. Kentucky's got to stand out here. Adu Thiero and Justin Edwards, now is your time to shine. So I think that's our preview today. It's going to be a really interesting game. I think it's going to be a physical game. Kentucky is going to be forced to step up one way or another. Which Kentucky Wildcats will we see this time? Will we see the team that just beat Bama by 22, or will we see the team that lost on the road to LSU, which, by the way, Mississippi State just went to LSU and beat the Tigers by 20 this weekend? I think Kentucky wins this game. I don't think that they win it by a lot. I think Kentucky will win this game. I will say 79-77. I think that it'll be close. I think that's the Kim Pom score, if I'm not mistaken, in Mississippi State's favor. Yeah, I think Kentucky wins this one. Flip what Kim Pom says. I think Kentucky wins this one by 2. 79-77. Big time quad 1 win on the road. That's what I'm hoping for. Let me know what you think in the comments below. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and God bless.